Good morning. I'm Liz Millican. I am a registered psychotherapist, and I have a Master of Divinity from Tyndale University. And so I will be focusing today on the topic of why people are leaving the church because of sex, from my experience providing sex therapy and general conversations that I've had with others. And in terms of theology, I'm not going to be doing any deep dive exegesis into anything. I'm just going to look at what we can learn from the Bible that anyone reading the Bible would get from it. Okay. So the way that I came to an interest in sex therapy was seeing social media posts, and all of the topics here, these are topics that I've seen from Christian groups. In Christian groups, commonly these topics come up. Women who are struggling to forgive their husband after porn use, wondering if there's positive stories of marital success, wondering if wives dislike sex, why don't they like sex, and experiences of sexless honeymoons or unconsummated marriages. And so just seeing these topics coming up over and over and over again, I thought, well, it seems to me like there need to be Christians who are available to support other Christians who are struggling with these issues. So this is when I began to study sex, and so I wrote my first paper on unconsummated marriages and understanding the connection between male performance anxiety and female performance anxiety, and how there's a connection between those two things that can cause female pain and difficulty with erections for men. So those are the information that led me into learning more on this topic. So just to highlight a few biblical teachings on sex, I think people are more likely to hear sermons on the sexual sin portion. I think everybody could list off what are the sexual sins listed in the Bible. It's something that's well familiar. The other passages that I have posted, they're passages in the Bible that focus on sex within marriage. So we have Genesis 1:28, which be fruitful and multiply. So this is often the primary way that Christians think of sex is, so you're supposed to be having kids. But there are other purposes within the Bible for having sex. So for 1 Corinthians 7:2-5, it says that marital sex is a way of avoiding sin. So what that means is marital sex is not sinful. And sometimes people have a hard time making this distinction. They grew up in a church that's very focused on what's been called purity culture. And so they're used to hearing sex is sinful, and they have a hard time mentally shifting when they get married. They have a hard time moving from sex is sinful outside of marriage to sex is good in marriage. And then 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, do everything to the glory of God. And so I think when we're talking about everything, that includes everything, including your sex life, that your marital sex life should be done for the glory of God. I also want to focus on a few passages from the Song of Songs, because I don't think I've ever heard a sermon preached out of these passages of the Bible. So chapter 1, verse 2 says, I long for your lips to kiss me. Your love makes me happier than wine. Verse 13 says, "The one who loves me is like a small bag of myrrh resting between my breasts." And I think there's something sensual intended in that verse there. Chapter 4, "Your breasts are lovely. They are like two young antelopes that eat among the lilies." Verse 7, "Every part of you is so beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." And I look at these verses and I think they're trying to create safety within the marital relationship. You know, if we go back to the garden, Adam and Eve were originally naked and unashamed. And I think a lot of people within the Christian community would have a hard time being naked and unashamed in front of their spouse. And I think this book of the Bible really highlights an attitude of exploration and enjoyment related to sexual intimacy. So, chapter 4, verse 16, "Wake up, north wind, come south wind, blow on my garden. Then its sweet smell will spread everywhere. Let my love come into his garden. Let him taste its fine fruits." Chapter 7, "Your navel is like a round bowl that always has mixed wine in it. Your waist is like a mound of wheat surrounded by lilies." So a lot of people think of kissing as just on the lips, but if a navel has wine in it, what do you do with wine? You drink wine. So I do think there's some intentional imagery there. Chapter 7, verse 7, "You are graceful as a palm tree. Your breasts are sweet as freshest fruit." Again, the idea of taste. Verse 9, "May your lips be the finest wine." So I do think there's that aspect of exploration that I don't think I've ever heard a pastor preach on the importance of exploring within a marital relationship. So next, there's that psychological impact of sexuality and faith based on how it's taught and talked about. So when there's that purity culture lens, I find there tends to be this shame, guilt, avoidance, fear, and brokenness. Even within marital sex, there's this hard time engaging in it. Whereas if someone's preaching more from the full Bible, talking about sex as an act of worship, because everything done for the glory of God is an act of worship. So marital sex is an act of worship. When there's that attitude, there's more of this connection, unity, bonding. The couple can be unashamed, and there's growth within the relationship. So then how do we get to where this leads people away from the church? So I've seen a few different groups that have come up. When I talk with sex therapists, many of them introduce themselves as raised Christian. And usually they're referring to that in a negative way, where they were raised Christian and there was this aspect of shame related to sex, and now they are free of that. There's also Christian couples who will explore polyamory, and they will go to these formerly Christian sex therapists wanting to explore, how can I have a fulfilling sex life? Unconsummated marriages, these tend to be quite common for very conservative couples who don't understand their body and don't have education on sexuality, having healthy sexuality. The things that are covered in school don't really teach people how to have positive sexual relationships. It's more focused on avoiding STDs and consent. There's so much more to what helps people connect in a marriage. Some people have sexless marriages, and they say, well, if this is what God intended, they disconnect from God because they don't understand if I've done all the things to follow God, why am I not living an abundant life? And then there's other people who are taken away from the faith out of a desire for a certain type of kink or sexual preference, which the Bible doesn't talk about a lot of kinks. There's some it does talk about, but there's a wide variety that it doesn't. Common questions people have are, is it sinful to use a vibrator? Is it sinful to use lubricant? People have these questions and they wonder about them, and I don't think there's really direct things in the Bible on that. So this brings me to the type of clients that I work with. So I work with a wide range of clients. I've worked with people who are same-sex attracted. I work with a lot of clients with gender dysphoria. But the concepts that I use with these clients are also concepts that I use with clients who don't have these issues. I find they are concepts that apply generally to everyone, and sometimes normalizing that human struggle, normalizing that difficulty, and helping people understand their bodies, how their brain functions, how their emotions functions, how their sex drive functions. People don't have this information. And so when I'm working with someone who has same-sex attraction, it can be helpful when I explain to them the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire. So spontaneous desire is what most people would refer to as their sexual orientation. This is just, for no reason, they feel a sense of attraction to someone. So it could be something that's driven by hormones or physical attraction, that more biological, innate response type of attraction. Responsive desire has to do with physical touch and interaction. Responsive desire is something that can grow over time. And so this is something I explain with, couples who might be in their 50s or older, where their bodies are slowing down and trying to understand why their sexuality isn't as responsive as it used to be. And so I talk to them about cultivating that desire for each other and what they can do to cultivate that desire. And also, there are many types of attraction. So there's that biological attraction, there's that psychological, emotional, mental attraction. There's social attractions, what attracts you about someone's values, about their culture. And there's also an aspect of repeated exposure, where getting to know someone more deeply can make you more attracted to them. When it comes to gender, I try to focus on what do we know about how identity develops? And from a scientific standpoint, we don't know very much. But from a Christian standpoint, is that identity rooted in Christ? Does the person know that they are fearfully and wonderfully made? Do they have that deep relationship with Jesus? Because I think if they don't have that strong relationship, they're going to struggle with their identity, whether it comes out in gender or an eating disorder or whatever it is. I do think if someone doesn't have a strongly rooted identity in Christ, there's more wavering in who they think they are. Whereas that identity in Christ gives you this foundation of knowing that you are loved, you are wonderful, you are here for a purpose. And I think that has powerful implications for people. And there's obviously more issues covered than what I've talked about so far. Some people, they don't have a specific sexual attraction to sex, they're more attracted to someone's personality. There's also people who are aroused by viewing themselves as the opposite sex. So the therapy that I provide for people, it's traditional non-affirming therapy. So the topics that I talk about, the ways that I explore emotions, it's the same whether or not I'm talking to someone who has gender dysphoria or whether I'm talking to a couple who's just trying to connect more as a couple. So these are really foundational issues where people don't always know how to connect. They don't always know how to view themselves or how to work through or process their emotions. So the therapeutic approaches for integrating sexuality into faith. This is the work that I do with my clients. I try to focus on those positive purposes for sex. Why did God give us sex? So yes, one is procreation. Another is exploration and enjoyment. And we know from research on sex that sex also helps with connection and comfort and building and strengthening relationships. A lot of the work I do focuses on increasing knowledge about the body and arousal. People often ask, why am I struggling with arousal? And they don't understand why their performance anxiety stops them from engaging sexually. How it, when men are anxious, it takes their blood into the core of their body, and so then they can't get an erection. So I'll have to work with people on managing that anxiety, resolving that anxiety, so that their blood flows freely through their body. I also work on improving communication with couples. If you watch, or if you've ever seen or been aware of, love scenes from a movie or a porno, there's usually almost no communication in it. There's very little talking, and they just have a wonderful time. And the reality is, as people, we need to communicate, we need to talk, we need to discuss what we like. We can't assume that someone knows it. And so sometimes sex can be a hot button topic for people where they don't know how to talk about it. And so I give people a structure and make it easier for them to communicate about what they want and what makes it easier for them to feel safe and loved as a couple, so that they can have an abundant sexual life that God desires for them. I also work with people on addressing biblical beliefs or biases about sex. So, is it okay for me to feel this way? Is it okay for me to have this desire? What does it mean? Helping people work through and understand those things. So, what does that mean for what can pastors and church leaders do about this? So, if you're a pastor, a deacon, an elder, or just a church member, I do not recommend trying to act like a sex therapist. That's going to be outside of your depth. But I do think reflecting on what role do you have in the body of God's church, and what other people do you know who can fill the areas that are beyond your scope, beyond what you can do yourself. Thinking about what has God called you to. How can we work together as one body? How is it that your role may need to shift? And what partnerships can we create? What resources do you need?